Most family empires begin with a dream. This one began with a crime scene. Inside the Gallo home, two young brothers, Ernest, 24, and Julio, 23, walked into a sight so devastating it would shape every decision they made for the rest of their lives. Their mother lay on the floor, shot in the back of the head. Their father was a few feet away, dead from a second bullet, the gun still warm. The sheriff didn't hesitate. "Murder, suicide," he said. Case closed. But the town whispered. Because for years, the Gallo family had shipped grapes into Chicago, deep into syndicate territory at the height of Prohibition. And in 1933, with the black market grape trade collapsing, some growers were rumored to owe money to people who didn't forgive debts. Was Giuseppe Gallo a broken man, or a man who crossed the wrong buyer? No one knows. No one ever will. Because that morning, standing over their parents' bodies, Ernest made a decision. We never talk about this again. And they didn't. Not to police, not to neighbors, not even to their own children. But trauma doesn't disappear. It mutates. Within weeks, these two young men, no money, no training, and now guardians of their 13-year-old brother, made a choice so reckless it was almost delusion. They would build a winery in the middle of the Great Depression, during the collapse of the grape market, armed with just $5,900 and two dusty pamphlets from a library basement. And somehow, they would turn that into the largest wine empire in American history. But the empire came with a cost, because the same silence, the same fear, and the same need for control that helped Ernest and Julio survive their father would later tear their own family apart. To understand how this empire rose, and how it nearly destroyed itself, we need to go back to where the story really begins, long before the gunshots. The story doesn't begin in California. It begins in Piozzo, a rugged village in northern Italy, home to Barolo, hard soil, and harder lives. That's where Giuseppe Gallo was born, a boy raised in discipline, scarcity, and emotional silence, lessons he would later repeat, violently. He immigrated to California in the early 1900s. In 1908, he married Assunta Susie Bianco, the daughter of a respected winemaker. This mattered, because while Giuseppe bounced between odd jobs and risky bets, Susie's family, the Biancos, understood wine. That's where the Gallo brothers first learned it, too. Ernest was born in 1909, Julio in 1910. Two sons growing up between two worlds, a volatile father and a grandfather quietly teaching them the craft of wine. Those early years shaped everything they would build and everything they would break. Before vineyards, Giuseppe ran a saloon and hotel, a rough life. Cash-based, unstable, fueled by drink, fights, and his unpredictable anger. When Prohibition loomed, most saloon owners panicked. But Giuseppe didn't. In 1918, he sold everything: the saloon, the hotel, the whole operation, and bought vineyards in the Central Valley. Most people thought he'd lost his mind. He hadn't. He was early, because Prohibition didn't kill wine. It created a loophole that made the right grapes more valuable than ever. The Volstead Act banned commercial alcohol, but allowed every household to make 200 gallons of wine a year. Demand exploded. Trainloads of grapes left California every harvest. The Gallo family jumped in head first. Giuseppe bought, sold, and shipped grapes across the country. The real labor? Ernest and Julio. Pruning, hoeing, harvesting in 110-degree heat. By their teens, they weren't just helping. They were the workforce. And at home, things were worse. Giuseppe ruled with fear. Belts, shouting, broken routines, broken childhoods. For the brothers, trauma wasn't an event. It was a lifestyle. And trauma does strange things. Sometimes it destroys you. Sometimes it forges you. For Ernest and Julio, it did both. When Ernest was 17, Giuseppe did something unthinkable. He sent his teenage son, alone, to Chicago to sell a boxcar of grapes. Chicago in the 1920s wasn't a city. It was a battleground. Al Capone, bootleggers, speakeasies, buyers who answered to the mob. Ernest walked straight into it. And he didn't just survive, he thrived. He returned home with $17,000 in cash, nearly $300,000 today. But instead of praise, Giuseppe screamed at him. And something inside Ernest crystallized: even when I win, I lose. That line became his engine, a need to prove himself, a need to control everything, a need to never be powerless again. By the late 1920s, the Gallo home was collapsing. The market shifted, profits shrank. Giuseppe grew volatile. In 1929, Ernest demanded a partnership stake. Giuseppe allegedly grabbed a shotgun. Ernest and Julio fled. Susie brought them back, but the family was broken. Then things got worse. Between 1930 and 1932, Giuseppe dug out a basement beneath the house and installed illegal winemaking tanks. The brothers were forced to help. Fear above ground, fear below it. Everything was cracking. By 1932, the grape market was collapsing. Home winemakers knew repeal was coming. They stopped buying. Prices crashed. Giuseppe was drowning in debt. And the whispers began. He had shipped grapes to Chicago for years. Some buyers weren't churchgoers, and some locals believed Giuseppe owed money to the wrong people. Maybe it was true. Maybe it wasn't. But something was coming. Something no one expected. June 21st, 1933. The day Ernest and Julio found their parents dead. The day everything changed. And from that tragedy came the beginning of an empire. The day after the murder-suicide, Ernest and Julio weren't thinking about business. They were thinking about survival. No money, debt everywhere, a ranch at risk, and custody of their 13-year-old brother. They didn't just lose parents, they inherited chaos. But Ernest saw something else. Opportunity. Repeal was coming. And when it did, America would need wine. Fast. For the first time in their lives, they had a clear shot. Banks weren't lending to anyone, especially not a 24-year-old with no collateral. So Ernest went to family. He asked his mother-in-law, Teresa Francia, for a loan. She gave him $5,000. Julio added $900.23, his entire savings. $5,900. Not empire money, but enough to start the fight. With no land and no equipment, they rented a warehouse at 11th and D Streets in Modesto. A glorified shed beside the railroad tracks. Perfect. If they could get wine into those tank cars, they could ship anywhere. They needed fermentation tanks. They couldn't afford them. So Ernest negotiated for the tanks now. Payment whenever the wine sold. Risky, desperate, genius. There was one problem. They didn't know how to produce commercial wine. So Ernest went to the Modesto Public Library. No books on winemaking, but in the basement, in the dust, were two forgotten pamphlets, written by Professor Frederick Bioletti, the pioneer of scientific winemaking. Inside were the keys to controlled fermentation, yeast management, clarification, stabilization, temperature discipline, cleanliness, everything their father ignored, everything most immigrant winemakers didn't know. Those pamphlets became their university degree, and they followed them with religious precision. This was the moment the Gallos stopped being farmers and started becoming industrialists. Repeal would hit on December 5th. Bars prepared, distributors formed, America waited. The brothers had 3 months. They worked 18-hour days, slept on the floor, checked fermentation tanks hourly. One temperature spike could kill everything. And against all odds, they finished. The wine was young, simple, but clean, bright, chemically consistent. Better than the competition, Ernest was ready to sell. Chicago again. But Ernest wasn't a terrified teenager. He was the co-founder of a winery with 177,000 gallons to move. He met with the Pacific Wine Company, but the wine wasn't clear yet. So the night before the meeting, he turned his hotel room into a laboratory, filtering, pouring, polishing each bottle by hand. In the meeting, the buyer shrugged at the 50-cent sample. "I don't want cheap wine," he said. "I want good wine." Ernest calmly pulled out a second bottle. Same wine, different price. "This lot is 90 cents. The buyer nodded. "I'll take 6,000 gallons. A quarter of their inventory. Gone in one move. A philosophy was born. Perception isn't part of the sale. Perception is the sale. Ernest controlled the market. Julio controlled the product. Showman and craftsman. Strategy and soil. A perfect balance. For now. By the end of 1934, the winery had produced 177,847 gallons and earned $34,000 in profit. They paid their debts, expanded production, bought more grapes. They weren't a family recovering from tragedy anymore. They were a business, and businesses have one rule: grow or die. By 1935, survival wasn't the goal anymore. Strategy was. The first year proved they could make wine. Now they had to dominate the market. Ernest realized something crucial. Bulk wine was a dead end. When you sell in bulk, you're invisible. Someone else captures the margin. Someone else owns the customer. So the brothers made a risky, visionary pivot. They would stop selling wine to bottlers and start bottling it themselves. It was the beginning of a new model, one built on total control, a model their competitors didn't understand yet. In 1939, Ernest visited a bottler in New Orleans. What he saw changed everything. Gallo wine, simple, Valley Red, was being bottled under the bottler's label and sold for several times the price. They were doing the work. Someone else was reaping the value. Ernest left furious and inspired. "If someone else is making more money on our wine than we are," he said, "we're in the wrong business." The brothers moved fast. They bought bottling plants in Los Angeles and New Orleans, financed with thin margins and aggressive credit. It was the first step toward what would become one of the most vertically integrated wine operations in the world. But integration requires more than ambition. It requires obsession. Ernest had plenty of that. By 1936, Ernest was running himself into the ground. Months on the road, sleeping in cars, inspecting liquor stores at dawn, interrogating distributors face to face. He trusted no one, delegated nothing, pushed himself past exhaustion, until he collapsed, hospitalized for 6 months. Most people would take that as a warning. Ernest treated it like a classroom. Flat on his back, he studied sales systems, market psychology, business theory. He took notes on how to turn his intensity into a machine, one that could outwork the entire industry, even when he physically couldn't. When he left the hospital, he didn't slow down. He scaled. He built a sales force with the same relentlessness he carried inside himself. Every store, every shelf, every city. If a salesman wasn't up to standard, he wouldn't last long. When the US entered World War II, most wineries braced for disaster. The Gallos accelerated. The government needed industrial alcohol for munitions, fuel, synthetic rubber. The brothers pivoted. They retooled. They won massive contracts. Sailors called the product torpedo juice. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid. The wartime boom cleared their debts, injected huge cash reserves, positioned Gallo to out-expand everyone after the war. By 1945, while other wineries were restarting operations, the Gallos were already scaling, buying land, equipment, processing plants. Most importantly, they owned the supply chain. With war money on hand, the brothers bought vineyards, thousands of acres, processing facilities, ranches. One of the most important was the Livingston Ranch. It gave Julio something he had always wanted: control of grape quality. Julio wasn't flashy, he wasn't loud, he was meticulous. While Ernest built markets, Julio built the agricultural engine behind them. For a time, the balance held. But one part of the family did not grow with the business: Joseph Edward Gallo, the youngest brother, raised by Ernest and Julio after the murder-suicide. Joseph assumed, naturally, he would one day own part of the company. But Ernest and Julio had other plans. He worked for the company, but owned none of it. And behind the scenes, the brothers used some assets from their parents' estate, assets Joseph partially inherited, to fund the early winery, without giving him equity, without telling him. He wouldn't discover the truth for decades. The fracture was forming, quietly, dangerously. By the early 1950s, the Gallos weren't big. They were dominant. Then came the masterstroke, the Gallo Glass Company, their own bottle plant, the largest winery-owned glass factory in the world. Most wineries bought bottles. Gallo made them. Cheaper, faster, better. Total control. Bottle shape, supply, packaging cost, distribution timing, retail consistency. Competitors couldn't keep up. Gallo wasn't a winery. It was an engine. A fortress built on precision, scale, control. But beneath the success was a truth the brothers didn't see. They had built this empire from trauma, and the trauma was still driving. By the 1960s, the Gallo brothers weren't just leading the wine industry, they were dominating it. Volume, distribution, integration. A sales army treating grocery aisles like battlegrounds. And with success came something else. Control. Over workers, over suppliers, over distributors, over the family, especially Joseph, the forgotten brother. Still working the ranch, still carrying the name, but owning none of it. His resentment was growing, and it was about to erupt. For years, Joseph believed what Ernest and Julio told him. You'll be part of this someday. You'll have a stake, your family. But the truth was brutal. He had no shares, no voting power, no legal claim. Worse, assets he partially inherited had helped fund the winery, and he didn't receive a cent of ownership. For a man raised by his brothers after a childhood tragedy, it wasn't just betrayal, it was erasure. He wanted something back, not money, his name. The private fracture became public war. In the mid-1980s, Joseph launched a dairy business. Joseph Gallo Cheese. A simple name. His name. The family name. Ernest exploded. Filed a lawsuit claiming Joseph had no right to use it. The irony was staggering. The brother who helped build the empire was being told he couldn't use his own surname. The case made national news. David versus Goliath. Blood versus brand. After 8 years of litigation, Ernest won. Joseph was forced to remove the name Gallo from his cheese. He rebranded as Joseph Farms. The fracture was complete. The empire stayed intact. The family did not. Behind the scenes, the Gallos faced criticism for a new category of drinks. Fortified street wines. Thunderbird, Cisco, Night Train. Cheap, potent, marketed heavily in urban neighborhoods. Critics accused Gallo of exploitation, fueling addiction, prioritizing volume over responsibility. The company argued, consumers get what consumers want. But for many, Thunderbird symbolized a company blind to the human cost of success. The contradiction grew sharper. Scientific precision on one end, moral compromise on the other. By the 1970s, the emotional patterns were unmistakable. Ernest's authoritarian leadership, Julio's perfectionism, silence, control, secrecy, fear-based discipline. These were the traits they learned from their father, the traits they once feared. Trauma doesn't vanish. It replicates, scales, spreads. Inside the Gallo Empire, the past wasn't a memory. It was policy. Julio died in a car accident in 1993. A devastating loss. Ernest continued to lead, but something was missing. Without Julio, the grounding force, the empire felt like a machine with one engineer too many. When Julio died in 1993, the winery didn't fall apart. It expanded. When Ernest died in 2007, the empire didn't slow down. It accelerated. Because by then, the E&J Gallo Winery wasn't a family business. It was a global engine, engineered to run long after the people who built it were gone. Today, the company is the largest wine producer in the United States, one of the largest in the world. Hundreds of brands, nationwide dominance, global distribution. The Gallos aren't part of the wine industry. They are the wine industry. But empires don't run on grapes. They run on philosophy. And the Gallo philosophy, written in those pamphlets, in those warehouses, in the trauma of that farmhouse floor, outlived the brothers. On one side of the legacy is brilliance. The Gallos pioneered scientific winemaking long before it was standard, industrial consistency in a tradition-driven business, vertical integration on a scale no American winery had attempted, national distribution systems that reshaped retail, marketing tactics that democratized wine for everyday Americans. They didn't just sell wine. They changed who wine was for. For many, that alone makes them visionaries. But every visionary story has a shadow. The other side of the legacy is more complicated. Inside the company, the culture became known for secrecy, hierarchy, loyalty enforced through pressure, an unforgiving work ethic, a command structure that mirrored the brothers' childhood critics called it authoritarian. Employees called it intense, supporters called it disciplined. All of them were right, because the Gallo Empire wasn't built like a winery. It was built like a fortress with one philosophy: control everything, lose nothing, never look back. The trauma of the past didn't stay buried. It resurfaced again and again. The bitter legal war with Joseph, the brother erased from the empire, left wounds that never healed. Imagine surviving a childhood murder-suicide, being raised by your brothers, working on the ranch for decades, and then being told you can't use your own last name on a block of cheese. The lawsuit lasted 8 years. When it ended, the fracture was permanent. The family name survived. The family unity did not. The Gallos influenced far more than wine. They shaped American grocery retail, alcohol distribution laws, industrial agriculture, standardized bottling and packaging, brand marketing on a national scale. Millions of people drink Gallo products every week without knowing it. That's how large the empire became. But scale isn't the whole story. The truth is simpler. 2 boys watched their father spiral, watched their mother die, inherited fear, silence, debt, and chaos, and they turned that darkness into an empire. But the same tools that helped them escape their father, discipline, control, emotional distance, eventually turned them into versions of him. Not in violence, but in leadership, in secrecy, in the instinct to dominate rather than share. Their greatest strength was also their fatal flaw. The empire didn't just rise from trauma, it ran on it. Today, the Gallo Empire stands as a monument to ambition, to survival, to reinvention, and to the complicated inheritance of family trauma. A dynasty born from tragedy and built on the refusal to let tragedy win. But the shadow of that morning in 1933 never truly left the company. Not for the brothers, not for the family, not for the empire. And maybe that's the real lesson. Greatness built from pain always carries a taste of the past. If you made it through the rise, tragedy, and legacy of the Gallo Empire, you're exactly the kind of person we make these deep dives for. And if you want your next story, we've got 2 that belong on your list. There's a legend about a Benedictine monk who invented champagne. He didn't. The lie fooled generations and built an entire luxury industry. That episode is The Monk and the Myth, the lie that created Dom Perignon. Or if you want something more modern, more chaotic, and somehow even stranger, the story of America's most exclusive wine, a founder arrested in handcuffs, a wait list longer than a mortgage line, and bottles that sell for the price of a used car. That one's called Screaming Eagle, a founder in cuffs, a cult on the hill, and the wine that broke the market. Either way, the world of wine is full of secrets, and most of them are far stranger than the drink in your glass. So thanks for watching. If you want more stories like this, you know what to do. Hit like, subscribe, and stick around.